Xin chào mọi người nhé. Mình là Cường, là thành viên của Việt Nam Origami Group và hôm nay là buổi Origami Talk thứ 11 của chúng mình. Buổi này chúng ta có một vị khách mời rất là đặc biệt là bác David Brill, là một tác giả origami người Anh, cũng là một tác giả rất là tên tuổi trên thế giới. Okay, hello everyone. Today we organized the 11th Origami Talk by Vietnam Origami Group, and I am Cường. Our guest today is Mr. David Brill. He is one of famous origami creators, and he is the one who made this book. I love it so much. Chú Giang có thể giới thiệu một chút là lý do tại sao mình làm buổi talk hôm nay ạ?
Okay, so I don't think David needs much of an introduction. He's quite well known in the origami community. He has been a core member of the British Origami Society since the mid-70s. And his book, Brilliant Origami, just show it, it's just a classic. It's published in 1996, and I bought that one in 1997. I still have it. Anyway, so he has been invited to many origami conventions around the world. Going back to David and Vogue, David knew about Vogue very early on. In 2006, when I invited him to be the judge for the friendly origami contest. And the winner of that contest is Cường, who is the coordinator of the talk today. So, David thì cũng có thể là không cần phải giới thiệu nhiều về ông David, tại vì ông cũng nổi tiếng trong cộng đồng origami rồi, và ông đã đạt giải quyển sách mà Cường mà giới thiệu là quyển sách rất là hay. Quyển sách đó là xuất bản năm 96. Và quay lại với giữa ông David và nhóm Vogue thì năm 2006 khi mà tôi mời ông David làm giám khảo cho cuộc chơi của Vogue, cuộc chơi lần thứ 2, thì David cũng đã biết từ Vogue từ hồi đó rồi. Thì và cái người mà thắng giải cuộc thi đó là Nguyễn Hùng Cường. Mà Cường hôm nay là lại phần dẫn cái chương trình hôm nay, nên đó là cũng một điều rất là thú vị. Also, David, he also wrote the forewords for the Vogue first book published with Nicholas in 2011. So, I mean, there's quite history between David and Vogue. Thì ông David cũng là người viết lời giới thiệu cho quyển sách đầu tiên của Vogue, làm với Nicholas 2011. I think there's not much more to say. Okay, but last but not least, his wife is Yoshizawa Akira, who is also quite well known in the origami community. And they have been travel around the world at the special guest at Origami Convention. Thì cũng không có cần nói thêm nhiều ở đây. Các bạn thấy có website của ông David thì các bạn có thể vào xem. Và vợ của ông David là bà Asia, thì bà cũng rất là nổi tiếng, không những là về origami thôi, nhưng mà bà còn bà có viết sách về đan nữa, thì các bạn nữ chắc là có lẽ thích.
Và riêng cái quyển origami của bà ấy thì cũng rất hay.
Curlicue rất là,
nói chung là mẫu của hai ông bà cũng gắn liền với tuổi thơ của nhiều người.
Okay, I think that pretty much it. I mean, I think we need much more introduction. Yeah.
If you have anything more to say, you can say to us.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Anybody want to say anything more before I start? Oh,
yeah.
No, I think we should start, and then
Yeah.
after you teach the model, then we can go back to the Q&A, and people can have more chance to talk and discuss.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
I think the best way to introduce you is through your origami designs.
It's a pleasure. Okay, let's see what we can do. So if you'd like to join in, we're going to fold this simple model. Relatively
Thì chúng
simple.
ta sẽ bắt đầu gấp một mẫu của ông David là mẫu đầu con ngựa. Okay. Yeah,
I'm
please
going
start.
to change my camera. So this model is a horse's head, but it was an idea which came to me quite recently, because many years ago I folded a very simple horse's head, and I wanted to see if I could make some changes. And I found these pictures to show you what I want to make. So this is this kind of horse with the white band on his nose is called a blaze horse. So shall I continue? Do you want me to pause for translation, or shall I just carry on?
I think people understand, David. I think.
Okay. If you want me to stop for translation, please say. So
Sure.
the previous horse's head that I made in origami, actually I should have made one, but I haven't. I wanted to get this white blaze in on the model, and so this is what I was aiming for. So if you'd like to join in, we need a simple square of, this is 15 centimeter origami paper, which is white on the other side. We need the white, obviously, because of the white blaze. And we're going to start by folding over one side to the other. Starting from the colored side, I want you to fold over, not all the way, to leave a small gap between the two edges. And the exact amount is variable. Obviously, if this gap is wider, it means that the front of the white part of the horse's head will also be wider. So I think that this sort of proportion is about right. The exact proportion is variable. So I think that's about okay. If you can follow that approximate proportion and then crease down on this side. And we have to then remember this distance here. If you can visualize this distance here, and remember that as closely as you can, memorize this distance. We have to fold over, open it up, and we have to fold over in the other direction, leave the same amount of gap on the other side. And I think it's about there. It's guesswork to a certain extent. I don't really want to measure it. Another way you can do it is lift up the paper, and you can see here is where the crease that we just made in the previous step. So if you compare the distances on either side, so this little gap here and this gap should be the same, or very closely the same, as close as you can get it. So I think it's about there. And I don't think it matters very much if they're not 100% perfect. So that if we then open up, oh, by the way, if I'm going too quickly, please tell me to stop. So in the middle of this, the white side of the paper, we have two mountain folds, which are like railway lines. It's the railway from Hanoi to Saigon. Okay. So now I'd like you to fold each of the two parallel edges to the nearest railway line. And the same thing on the other side. So you can immediately now see the white blaze of the horse. This is the stripe of the horse in the middle. Okay, so So the next thing I'm going to do is to open up both of these sides, and starting from the railway station in Saigon here, I'm going to fold this corner up, starting from this point at the bottom edge, and I'm going to make this corner here touch this vertical. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So this angle that you've made is 30 degrees, and behind it's 60 degrees. So this is 30 and this is 60. But that's not very important. But there is a bit of geometry in it to a certain extent. So when we've done that, we can then fold this new folded edge to this nearest railway line. And of course, I'm going to do exactly the same thing over here. Is that clear? I hope so. Not too difficult. So I'm now going to fold this short raw edge once again into the center, to the nearest railway line. And the same thing over here. So if you compare with this picture, you can see this part of the horse's head with the white space at the top is represented by this general area here. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to lift it off the table, and I'm going to fold this corner once again down to the nearest railway line. And it may or may not touch this point. You don't have to make it touch this point. It's more important that these two edges here line up with the vertical right-hand railway line. In my case, it's just extending a little bit past this edge which is behind. But that's perfectly okay. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. This is, you can guess, this is to make the ears of the horse. Just going to zoom in a bit so you can see it a bit more clearly. Very confusing because my image is reversed. So I never know which way to move my paper. So having done those two valley folds, can you please open it up and then make these into reverse folds, aiming to make a chop at the top here. And the same thing, obviously, with the other ear. I think this is a good example. If translation is not needed, I think the language of origami is pretty much universal because it's a visual thing, isn't it? So we don't need to translate, really. Okay, so now I'm going to, this is a little bit more tricky. I'm going to pull out this edge here. Actually, no, forget that. Sorry, I'm wrong. So the next thing I want to do is adjust the position of the tip of this ear. And I want to make, at the moment, the ear here is lining up with the railway line on the right-hand side. I want to adjust it so that it touches the railway line on the other side. And that means just pulling over this paper on the right-hand side to change the shape a little bit over here. So we extended the crease on this side here. And I'm going to do the same thing with this ear. I'm going to make that crossover and touch the railway line on the other side. And it means I have to adjust, put in a new crease on this outside here. So this is where, I hope everybody's managing to keep up. If you need any more time, please say. Very good.
I think everyone is fine.
Everybody's okay. Right, now, so that now this is the time we release this paper from inside here by pulling this corner. And I'm going to, if you look at this raw edge here, what I want to do is adjust so that the two edges which are exposed, it's something like a rabbit ear. These two edges now need to line up with one another. We leave the ear at the top where it was, but we adjust these two raw edges so that they line up together, and then we flatten. And everything else should stay where it was before, which hasn't happened with me. I'm just going to just make a few changes. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to just adjust these creases, making these two raw edges that I pulled out from behind line up with one another. And once again, I'm going to flatten it down. How's that? Okay, so I'm now going to look at this end. This is the nose of the horse. And you can see that there are two existing creases on this colored paper here. One here and one here. Now I'm going to make this square edge. I'm going to pick it up and fold it to the point where those two creases touch the railway lines. So where this crease is touching the railway line, I'm folding this up so that it touches the and then I'm going to open this up here. And here we need to make some changes here, because this is a valley fold, but here this is a mountain fold. This short side here is a mountain. We need to change that into a valley. So I'm just going to make it so that this will reverse fold inside and collapse down symmetrically. So what we're actually here, these corners here are going to be the nostrils of the horse. So these two corners here. So at the moment everything is flat. We need to start making this into 3 dimensions. There's something else we can do before we do that, which is, so just comparing with the image. So can you see the eye of the origami horse is going to be somewhere here. Let's get these properly aligned. So the eye is about here. But here you can see there's a kind of a diagonal going from just above the eye towards a point halfway between the eye and the nose. So I want to make here a mountain fold which starts maybe halfway along this edge here, starts from a point there and goes up just past this corner here. I'll put it in first and you'll see what I'm aiming at. So I've mountain folded. There's not a precise reference point, it's up to you, but I'm trying to suggest this angle here, which goes from above the eye towards the center of the nose, or the bridge of the nose, if you like. And at the same time, I've exposed a little white triangle here, which can suggest the eye of the horse. So having done it on one side, I'm going to try and repeat it equally on the other side. So this is a bit like drawing with the paper. Mine isn't very symmetrical, in fact, but I don't think that matters very much. So we've now suggested this diamond shape, if you like, this long rhombus shape, if you like, which is the upper part of the blaze of the horse. Okay, now then it's time for us to start going into 3 dimensions. And the first thing we want to do is to valley fold down this ear. Same thing here. Again, it should line up with the 2 railway lines. And so let me just get a pencil. So you can see there is a crease here. Actually, can't see it myself. It's here. The crease is like this. This is a crease that we've just put in, and it goes from the corner to a point touching the railway line. The same thing on the other side. It's a mirror image. So what we want to do, that crease is at the moment a valley fold. We want to make that into a mountain fold. And it needs to go through the layers behind as well. So it isn't horizontal, it's a shallow V shape. And when it meets the railway line on one side, it's exactly opposite to the end of the crease on the other side. And so you can connect those two with a mountain fold. So you've got a valley fold, sorry, a mountain fold, a mountain fold, and a mountain fold. So there are 3, like a U shape, which is effectively the back of the horse's head. Now then, so what we now want to do is, looking at this angle here, you need to bisect that angle with a valley fold. So this edge that we've just creased as a mountain fold needs to swing over and line up with the railway line further on. and the same thing on the other side. So we want to bisect that angle, which is easy to do in origami. We just fold one edge to the other, and you make a valley fold connecting the two sides. These need to be quite crisp creases. I haven't done it very well on mine. So the railway line continues over the back of the head, but mine is very untidy here. I'm going to try and tidy it up a bit. A real mess there. Now you'll find that if you look at it from the back, here's the front of the horse. If you turn it round and arrange for these two bisecting triangles to go to the left and to the right, you'll find that there are two corners at the bottom of the ears which are touching the railway line, and there's a tiny layer of paper behind which can lock everything together. If you fold up this narrow little strip of paper over the corners, it's a valley fold, you can lock the ears in place. Again, I haven't done a very good job on mine. So can you see I've got a very narrow little strip of paper which is just folded up and locking the two ears in place, and the thing is now beginning to form a three-dimensional shape. You can bend the ears back like that to give a more realistic appearance. Is that clear? Does anybody need me to explain that again? So maybe it's a bit easy to see on my other example where the little locking area is a bit bigger. And you see what we did was to fold that edge just over these corners, which is enough to hold the ears in position and starts to make the shape of the horse really truly three-dimensional. And then you can bend the ears of the horse back a little bit. In fact, we've almost finished. So we'll go back to this one. I'm just going to bend the ear back without releasing the lock, which is in this point here. The ears are pointing backwards rather than forwards. And then you might want to just open the ear a little bit. Something like that. I don't really like using origami tools, I must admit, but this thing is quite useful. So you can now see that the general shape of the horse's head is making itself fairly clear. Okay, so we can do a bit more tidying up to give it a bit more realism. So in this corner here, we have a right angle. See this? There are two edges meeting which form a right angle in this point here. And what I'm going to do is to lock behind this right angle. I'm going to fold that tiny bit back so that it locks the thing in place. So I can still see the eye, but I've just made this sharp corner a little less sharp. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Here you can see the white of the eye. And this corner I'm just going to tidy away by folding behind. I'm going to shape the, if we compare the shape of the horse's head in reality, we want to just make some subtle curves here. Now, once again, we can use this existing crease here, which is a mountain fold on the top layer. We need to put that through onto the layer behind. And the way to do that is just to squeeze in onto the layers below using the existing crease line. So I've just reformed that crease, but this time taking with it the layer inside. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And once again, by doing this, we're giving some naturalism to this kind of shape here of the horse's sort of cheek, which is I'm trying to copy the general shape of the horse's head. Here's this cheek. He has a big bone here, and it's the same shape here. Now, to just encourage this nose and mouth area, I'm going to make another little very narrow valley fold, which starts at the end of this mountain fold that we creased before. And it's a very shallow valley fold right almost next to it, so the valley fold starts at the same point and then goes back a bit further towards the cheekbone, like this. So the result is that I've made a sort of a curve. I'm accentuating this cheek area on each side. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Just a very shallow, tight valley fold, which encourages the horse shape. So you can see that we're pretty much there. We've pretty much finished. So the only thing I'm going to do now is just suggest the nostril of the horse. So I'm going to fold over this corner. Can you see this corner? Just a tiny bit. I'm going to fold it down, something like that, and the same on the other side. And then I'm going to squash that double layer open. Easier said than done. To suggest sort of rounded nostril. And on the picture you can see that the horse's nostril is really quite a big hole. So this is maybe too small to be, what should we say, accurate. But I think the important thing with origami is we want to suggest rather than to reproduce, to copy exactly. So it's suggesting the nostril form. Again, I'm struggling to open up this little layer. But the aim is to make a sort of rounded hole to suggest the nostril of the horse. So with this one, I had another experiment. So I tried to make the nostril a bit further back to try and make it a bit more representational with the real thing. But I don't think it's very important to be absolutely representational. The important thing, I think, is to suggest rather than to describe. So that's more or less. So that's, I think, it's a fairly close resemblance from the origami version to the reality. So I hope you all managed. Would anybody like any further explanation? Because I'm happy to give it if you're stuck.
Yeah, thank you very much. Here is our result.
Very nice model, David.
Thank you. I think it's economical. I liked it because it's it isn't loads of layers. It's the maximum number of layers in any one plate is about 3, I think. Some of very complicated models we've seen that the paper is so thick. Okay, it's a simple subject, truthfully, but I've tried to, if you like, draw with the paper, not to. The paper seems to fall naturally. So, any questions?
Không biết là mọi người đã gấp xong mẫu đầu con ngựa của ông David chưa? Nếu mà ai có mẫu nào thì có thể dơ lên cho tất cả cùng xem nhé.
Mr. Dev, I used the other technique to lock the head. Can you see it?
Let me just see if I can see you.
Because this area is very small, so I used the other technique.
Maybe you can find it. You can adjust some of the proportions to make that area a bit bigger.
Hope you see it.
I can't see it too clearly, but I sympathise. It is a very small area here at the back.
Yes, very small.
On this, but it does seem to work. It's enough in both cases with mine. A little bit fiddly with the one I did teaching you, but this one here that I did before, it's a good bit bigger. And I can't. Okay. I don't know what governs how big that little section is, but maybe by some experimentation you can adjust it to make that a bit bigger.
Okay.
It'll certainly be to do with the width of the railway line at the beginning. So, did anybody else struggle to make it, or you all managed reasonably well? Looks good.
Looks beautiful.
Bravo.
Thank you. As an Australian, it made it a little bit kangaroo-ish to me, to my eyes.
I'm more familiar with horses than kangaroos in England.
It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Hy vọng là mọi người đều có mẫu đầu ngựa của mình. Và bây giờ thì ta có thể chuyển đến phần hỏi đáp với ông David Brill. So now we can move on to the question and answer session.
Okay.
So nếu mà em Sơn có thể cho Sơn là đầu tiên đi.
Hello, Mr. Dev. Nice to meet you. I have a question for you.
Please.
I just think box splitting makes it easier to create more complex models, but I can say it's somehow less interesting than molecule. So, do you agree with me?
I'm sorry, I didn't completely hear. Could you say it again? About complex models.
Box-Pleating makes it easier to create complex models. Do you?
That's an interesting thing. I think it's what I should say is, I think certainly in my origami career, at the beginning when I started to design my own models, I was interested in the very complex, and I wanted to make designs which had lots of details, I wanted to reproduce every conceivable feature of the subject that I could. And I think I was, as a young man, in my 20s when I started to design my own models, I wanted to impress other people. But I think nowadays I'm more interested in impressing myself than other people. So I think maybe you're right. It's easier to design a more complex model than it is a simple model. To make a good simple model is surprisingly difficult, because I think by definition a simple model can't describe everything. It can't be because it's simple. You have to edit information. You have to think now. What can I include, but what can I leave out? What can I edit from, and still portray the essence of the subject? And my wife has put a message in front of me. She says everything simple is genius, and everything genius is simple. Yeah, maybe that's true, but I think to make a good simple model, but really convincing, it can be more difficult than making something which is an engineering masterpiece, where all the fingers or the teeth or whatever, the hair is shown by folding. So I think that's one of the skills that we have to develop. I think the lessons that we take are from the masters of the past, like his subjects down to a real minimum, and yet he was interested in conveying the suggestion or implying the model rather than describing it, and that's really skillful. Does that answer your question?
I think there are some misunderstanding, because the part that he say box splitting is a very useful way to create models. It's just the first sentence. After that he say that, but the disadvantage of box splitting is somehow sometimes it makes the model less interesting.
Less interesting than
So maybe his idea and your idea is something similar. He is not praise box splitting over other techniques. Yeah, and he also asks you for some advice for young creators who want to, or young folder who want to create. So if you have any advice for them.
Yeah, maybe. So starting first of all with the box pleating concept. I think if you master the art of box pleating, which I have to say I don't enjoy very much personally, but I think with box pleating you can achieve virtually anything you want by making these complex grid patterns with a few diagonals. It's possible to analyze any subject and virtually to create anything that you want, any subject that you can imagine. So the real pioneer of box pleating was an American, Neil Elias. And he achieved in the 1960s, 1970s, really, really remarkable origami engineering. For example, the classic example is the moment of truth, which is a bullfighter and a bull, all from a single sheet. It was from memory, it's a 3x1 rectangle. So it was three things together, folded from the same sheet. One was the bull, the other was the figure, the toreador, and the third was the cape, the cape which the bullfighter uses. And he was able to achieve all of them from a single uncut rectangle. And more than that, he was able to use both sides of the paper to illustrate different facets of the model. So he was the pioneer of box pleating. And people, we see in modern origami forums, etc., online, we see a lot of stuff. And people still achieve amazing results by box pleating. But I have to say, it's not a particular style I'm fond of. I really enjoy all this pre-creasing of the grid, analysing all the legs and the points and the ears, etc., etc. When I was a young man, yes, I was fascinated by it, but I'm afraid I'm not anymore. But the second part of the question was about advice to young designers, and I think in my case, when I learned about origami as a young man, as a boy, really, I was less than 10 years old when I first started to fold. And I was soon fascinated by achieving amazing results from, this very, very simple raw material. This was the big excitement to me. From something as absolutely fundamental and simple as that, you could achieve an amazing variety of subjects just by folding. And the other thing, in my experience, I enjoyed the fact that there were no tools. I said before, I don't really like tools in origami. This is quite useful occasionally, but I don't really, for me, it's a slightly impure. So for me, the frustration for me when I was a child was I was given a lot of craft books, things to make with your hands. And a lot of these things required quite a number of tools. So you might need, obviously you need paper to make some kind of construction, but you need lots of other things like scissors and glue and paint, etc., etc., etc. Now, when I was a child, I was given books with instructions how to build this, that, or the other. And the problem was that usually if there was a list, I didn't have everything on that list. So I didn't have scissors at the time. I couldn't find them, or there weren't any in the house. Somebody else was using the scissors, or I didn't have the right colored paint or whatever. So there was usually something on that list of what you will need. So I couldn't even begin. Now that was never the case with origami, because I always could find a simple sheet of paper. So that for me remains an attraction of origami. 70 years later, almost 70 years later, that for me is a really fundamental attraction of origami, that we don't need any tools. We don't need these things. We don't need scissors. We don't need paint. And so I get a little bit uncomfortable with people who use methyl cellulose, because a lot of modern designers require, they don't use it as an alternative, but they need it. The model that they design needs methyl cellulose to hold its form, for it to be successful. Now, about suggestions for young folders, I think the answer really would be that I would suggest that you follow your nose. You fold what you are attracted to. You absorb as much information and you acquire as much skill and understanding of the techniques and if you like, the fundamentals of origami. Explore the many, many different styles that exist nowadays in origami. It's a remarkable world, isn't it? We see fantastic results in all these different spheres. So, for example, we have a simple model, maybe like the horse's head that we've just folded. We have the action model, the toy, the thing the jumping frog. We have the practical, the things like boxes and envelopes. We have engineering challenges like Neil Elias and the Moment of Truth, etc., etc., and the very complex multi-subject ideas that people try to make. We have the geometric. People make beautiful abstract shapes. We have the unit style modulars where people lock things together. We have the tessellation branch where very complex decorative patterns are made with essentially flat sheets where layers are opened up to make patterns and to make interesting decorative forms. etc. It goes on, and there are mathematical folds, etc. So I think if you're a young person who wants to develop a creative style, you have to find what you are attracted to, and to study as much as you can about what has already been done. You have to study the past, if you like. You have to educate yourself with the techniques of the world that have already taken place. And then maybe you can find your own style based on the fundamentals and the knowledge that you picked up on that journey. Does that answer the question?
Yes, I think that answers the question clearly. Does anyone here, if you have any question, you can chat, and we will deliver it to Mr. Brill.
Please call me Dave. Please call me Dave. I don't like Mr. Brill. That's my fault.
Okay. Another question we got. It is from a person named Sarah. She's asked, what and who inspired you to create origami?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. So when I first started to do origami, it was from books. I learned origami from the books which were available to me in England, and there wasn't a big choice really. So we had in the 60s and 70s there was a television series which was made by an already famous TV personality, and his name was Robert Harbin. And he was, his real profession was not an origami expert, he was a stage magician. And but incidentally, his most famous illusion for his magician activities was to, he had an assistant, usually an attractive female assistant, and she went into a box, something like a telephone box, and he was then able to put in two separate metal plates right through the box, apparently through her body, and then he was able to move the central part of her body from one side to the other, and she was, so it was called the zigzag lady, because it seemed as you could see her head, you could see her middle, and you could see her feet in a zigzag like this. So this was all an illusion, but that was his most famous trick. But he had an interest in origami. For him, it was, I think, as kind of a puzzle solving, something like his activity was to, his main job, if you like, was to find a way to perfect the zigzag lady. And so I think there was some common ground with the studies of origami. Very often it's a kind of a puzzle. You have to solve some technical challenge. For example, we think, how can we make the face of the horse white in the front? So this is a kind of very simple puzzle that we have to solve. So he was, I suppose, influential. He helped me because I had somebody, Vanessa, showing Origami 3 and Origami 1, which I also have very dog-eared copies.
I had these as a child as well, my first books.
They're very, so I think there were a few problems with them. They had quite a few mistakes in the diagrams. But nonetheless, it was sufficient to inspire lots of people of my generation. So Harbin maybe was the first person to give me a bigger interest in origami. I got other books from an American author called Samuel Randlett. He published several very nice books, slightly better drawn than Harbin's. But then after a while, I joined the British Origami Society in the mid-70s. And soon after that, I decided to go to the first meeting of the British Origami Society, the first meeting that I'd been to, which was in 1975 in London. and I met a few young men, people approximately my age, and the most important or the most influential, if you like, for me was a man called Max Hume, and he was very, very creative at the time. And the thing that he was inspirational to me because he showed me that designing new origami models was not a chance. It wasn't. It wasn't an accident. He had a very analytical mind, and he was able to in many cases solve his origami problems in his head before he even picked up the paper. And he had already acquired a big, if you like, a lexicon or a source of information about how he could solve these kinds of problems. And so he was a big influence. The other major influence is Akira Yoshizawa, because in one of the Harbin books, the book of Robert Harbin, and there was a big book called Secrets of Origami, which had some pictures of designs by Yoshizawa, who was emerging there in those years, in the 60s and 70s. He became better known through people like Robert Harbin. And he, because of these pictures, I was very intrigued by this rather different style. The designs which were shown in Harbin's paperbacks and the other books, they were largely very flat, and they were very, what shall I say, they were, if you like, two-dimensional, or they might have been an animal, but it was as if it was an animal that had been flattened. So, you know, I mean, here at least we've got some sort of three-dimensionality. The thing has got some volume, but the very few images of Yoshizawa's models, the thing that was really noticeable was the fact that the folds weren't necessarily very sharp or crisp. They were soft, and they suggested the real form of the animal. For example, the back or the curve of the face. There were many soft folds, as many soft folds as there were sharp, crisp ones, which was the only kind of fold that I had been able to make myself. So I was very intrigued by Yoshizawa, and I think other people of my generation were very influenced by him. And so he was a major. So three major influences. To answer the question, one, Robert Harbin, he inspired me to create. I read a lot of other books which had suggestions about how to create. The second one was Max Hume, who showed me that it was really an analytical process to design new models. And the third was the artistic style, the concept of curved and soft folding of Yoshizawa, and the very, very beautiful results that could be achieved from, again, the other thing about Yoshizawa's designs, that the paper was thicker, much thicker. I didn't use origami paper very much in those days. It's very difficult to find when in the 70s when I was began to fold creatively. But Yoshizawa showed that you could fold with really quite thick paper. Now, this is well known today. Lots of people use the wet folding principles that were pioneered by Yoshizawa. And I was, I was really fascinated and deeply impressed by this particular style. So those are probably my main three influences. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, thank you. And it also answers part of the next question from our member Nguyễn Việt Hưng. He said that among all of the works that you follow from other creators, what is your favorite?
Ooh, that's difficult. There's a few things which I really love. I remember when I first went to BOS convention, I was taught a couple of models, which I still, number one, the very, very important, very beautiful designs. And the one is a simple dish by a man called Philip Shen, who was a Chinese Hong Kong American. Some of his works were published by Harbin, but there was a beautiful dish which was a blintz form. It starts with a square with the sides to the center, the thing, and it was all geometric. Everything fell into place so very beautifully. So it was like a star dish, but very three-dimensional, very structural, very sturdy, very, very strong once it was folded. The other classic that I love is the wonderful cube of Fujimoto, Shuzo Fujimoto, which is such a simple construction, but just it's a cube. It's not a particularly beautiful thing in its own right, but the way this cube is formed is such genius. It's incredibly economical. It is the actual process of folding is fascinating. It has a movement which is, really unusual. Everything collapses with a kind of a twist. It's completely magical, and it's something that we often discuss in England. We have a radio program which is called Desert Island Discs, and on the radio program there's an interviewer and a famous person who is interviewed, and they have to imagine, the famous person has to imagine that they are alone on an island in the middle of the ocean. And they in the radio program, they have to say what pieces of music would they like to be able to listen to on the desert island. And so I've often thought that there is an equivalent of origami. If you had 7 pieces of paper, what models would you fold? Or which of the 7? I mean, it's just an arbitrary number. This happened to be the number of the radio program. But equivalently, if you had 7 pieces of paper, what would you fold? You only had 7 models to fold. But at least there are 2 there that I've given you. One for me is the Shen dish. The second is the cube of Fujimoto. There's another wonderful classic design which I love too. Again, I was taught it at the very first BOS meeting I went to, and this is the 8-piece star frisbee of Robert Neal. It's a very simple unit construction, modular construction, and it makes a ring which you can pull apart, and it makes a beautiful star. And the concept is really so elegant. It's the simplest folding, but the transformation of one shape to another just by pulling it apart. I mean, you probably know the design. So there are 3. I can probably think of others too, so those are classics. But I could go on and think of others, of course. What else? Yoshizawa, of course. I would have to choose something of Yoshizawa to fold on my desert island. Maybe something of Max Hume, because he was a big influence. Maybe the Jack in the Box of Max Hume, with a little man who pops out of a box when you release the lid. I don't know. I have to keep thinking, but those are a few examples.
Yeah, I think the common of all of those models is that they have a very elegant folding process.
Sure.
So you always like the folding process first, not just the final result, but
of course. Well, that's fundamental. So I think that's very important. I mean, we have lots of discussions in the UK, in England here, about what's more important, the finished model or the process, the sequence of folding, and they're fairly evenly balanced. I mean, we want to achieve something at the end, but at the same time, we want to enjoy the journey, enjoy the if you like, the flowing sequence of the folds, and you have to be pleased by the way the paper behaves while you're folding it. And the best models have some sort of slight surprise. I mean, even if you're making even a classic bird base, I often think the petal fold it's a very beautiful movement to make a petal fold where the sides of the paper come in and meet in the center as you make the petal fold. So that's a very common example of an enjoyable process in origami, and I think that's really important. And I think for me, that probably the process is just slightly more important than the finished object.
Yeah, I understand.
Thank you so much.
Okay, it's a pleasure.
Vanessa also have one question for you. You could speak up. Yes.
Okay. Based similar, related to what you've just been talking about, amongst the models that you've designed, do you have, dare I say, do you have a favorite, or is it like your children that you can't choose one?
It's very difficult. I remember I have a good friend of mine, you may have heard him, Paul Jackson. He was an Englishman. He now lives in Israel. He's married to Miri Golan, and they have a big origami activity in Tel Aviv in Israel. But we used to meet very often when he lived in England before he moved. And we used to have very, what should we say, intellectual conversations about origami. We were pretending to be intellectual because we were young men. And he used to say, "What's the favorite model?" It's probably the next one. He used to say, the next. So I said, well, maybe it's the last one, the most one I created most recently, because in the past, I think if you're an artistic or you're a creative person, you don't really want to retread old steps, do you? That's done. It's in the past. Okay, sometimes you pick up something that's emerged some years ago, and you think, well, that's not bad. Maybe I should enjoy folding it again. And sometimes you pick it up again, and you find some improvement, or you think, oh yeah, well, I can do that an easier way. I think his answer of the next one is a really profound answer, and I think
very profound.
But I think more simply, the most recent one. No, I've got a few favorites of mine. I made 5 years ago or more. I made a little robin, which I'm very pleased.
That's my favorite.
Thank you.
That's my favorite too. I love that one.
Well, people say it's cute. Well, the only thing is, I'm not sure. I've never really gone out of my way to design anything that's cute. But I'm not sure I like
charm.
But I'm not sure I like cute things just for cuteness's sake. Do you know what I mean? So I prefer my things to be sort of strong. Maybe it's a sort of macho thing, I don't want. Well, yeah. Anyway, it's got
very sculptural.
Yeah, it does. So the little robin is. It's got a nice sequence as well. It's surprising. It's got some excitement in the process. So
a lot of delight as you're doing it. I
also like early on in my my creative adventures. I made a little book, which I like quite a lot. You can fold it fairly quickly. It's easy to make for gifts. What else? I'm famous for my horse from an equilateral.
Horse, yes.
But that's quite a it's a bit of a challenge to fold it. People. I always remember I have a nice story about the horse. So I published some diagrams. If you go to my website, you'll find some instructions, some diagrams for the horse. And somebody wrote to me and they said, "Look, Mr. Brill, David, can you help me? Because I'm stuck with the horse. Can you help me?" I said, "Yeah." I said, what step are you stuck on? How far have you got? He said, "Well, actually, it's step number 1." So I don't know how to make an equilateral triangle.
Triangle. Yeah.
So I don't think he had much hope in finishing the whole thing, because if I want to make a horse, which I do from time to time, or people ask me, "Can you fold a horse?" I have to sort of get in the mood a bit. I have to sort of psych myself up and do a bit of practice, if you like. Have a couple of sort of dry runs before I, and even then sometimes the results aren't, as I wish. I'm not totally in control. Maybe that's something too. I mean, I don't. If you're working creatively, maybe that it's important not to be in complete control of what you're working in, because that's a sort of gives scope for improvement, or it gives you some stimulus for maybe some surprise. I don't know quite. I'm trying to be too
personality and some, yeah. Well, that's
anyway.
a lovely answer. You're quite the philosopher as well.
Pseudo philosopher. Any more?
Ok. Nãy giờ thì không biết có bạn nào mà không dành tiếng Anh có cần dịch lại không nhỉ? Có cần mình phải có cần tóm tắt qua không? Nếu cần thì mọi người cứ lên tiếng nhé, thì để mình tóm tắt qua lại.
Qua một tí này. Tóm tắt qua một tí.
Tóm tắt qua. Thì cái phần câu hỏi và trả lời cũng tương đối, nãy giờ hỏi ông ấy cũng khá nhiều thứ. Nghĩa là đầu tiên thì Sơn hỏi ông ấy về Box-Pleating ấy, thì là một kỹ thuật mà chắc nhiều người cũng sử dụng. Thế nhưng mà ông ấy thì ông không phải fan của cái kỹ thuật này, nên là ông ấy không hay dùng. Thế với cả là cái lời khuyên cho những tác giả trẻ ấy, thì mình cũng không nhớ là ông ấy trả lời cụ thể như nào. Nên nói chung là đầu tiên là sẽ phải tìm hiểu các kỹ thuật khác nhau để xem mình thích cái kỹ thuật nào, mình thích cái hướng đi nào ấy, với cả xem là trước đây đã có những cái người làm ra những cái gì trước rồi thì mình cũng nên học, để sau đấy từ đấy mình phát triển thêm. Mình cũng chỉ nhớ được mấy cái ý thế. Xong rồi là còn có một người hỏi là ai đã truyền cảm hứng cho ông ý, thì ông ấy liệt kê ra 3 người chính. Đấy là đầu tiên là ông Robert Habin. Thì ông này cũng là một người nổi tiếng trước cả ông David Brill rồi, nhưng mà nổi tiếng với vai trò là ảo thuật gia thì phải. Đấy. Thế thì ông ấy Robert Habin thì cũng có nhiều sách về origami và có nhiều mẫu rất hay. Đấy. Tiếp theo là ông Max Hume, thì là một người mà đã cho ông David biết là, nghĩa là mình sẽ có thể là tưởng tượng và giải quyết vấn đề trong đầu nữa, chứ không chỉ là cứ gấp theo kiểu ăn may. Tiếp đến là Yoshizawa Akira, thì là một người mà cho ông ấy thấy là origami nó có thể là tạo ra những cái đường cong, rồi là những cái mẫu rất là nghệ thuật ấy, chứ không chỉ là đường thẳng hay là các mẫu dẹt, mà nó còn là đường cong, rồi khối 3D, nó còn là những cái biểu đạt rất là sống động. Thế rồi là ngoài ra thì có những câu hỏi là ông ấy thích mẫu nào nhất, nghĩa là ông ấy thích gấp mẫu của tác giả khác nào nhất, và cái mẫu nào mà của bản thân ông mà ông thích nhất. Đấy, thì ông ấy cũng liệt kê ra nhiều lắm, mình không nhớ lắm là ông ấy liệt kê ra những cái mẫu nào, nhưng mà đa số ấy là những cái mẫu đấy là những cái mẫu cổ điển của rất là nhiều tác giả cũ, tác giả lớn tuổi ấy. Và có thể là cái thế hệ bây giờ của mình thì ít biết, nhưng mà cái điểm tự chung của những cái mẫu đấy là có cách gấp rất hay, nghĩa là ông ấy muốn tận hưởng cái quá trình gấp nhiều hơn một chút so với cái kết quả đẹp. Nghĩa là ông ấy bảo là trong cái nhóm hội origami của anh ấy thì có những cái cuộc thảo luận về việc là ai thích cái nào hơn, cái quá trình cấp mẫu hay là cái kết quả. Thì riêng với ông thì ông ấy thích cái quá trình cấp mẫu hơn một chút, ông phải gấp sướng tay đó, còn kết quả đẹp không thì nó thấp hơn chút. Còn cái mẫu nào mà ông ấy thích nhất của bản thân ông ấy, thì ông ấy trả lời theo một cái kiểu là ông ấy mượn lời của một người khác là ông Paul Jackson, là cũng là một tác giả người Anh nhưng mà hiện giờ sống ở Israel. Thì ông ấy bảo là cái mẫu mà ông ấy thích nhất ấy là cái mẫu tiếp theo, nghĩa là ông ấy muốn để là có một cái gì đấy nó tò mò và hướng về phía trước hơn là mình cứ nhìn về quá khứ mà. Thế thôi. I remember that we asked you about who is your inspiration, but not what is your inspiration? Why do you create?
It's very difficult, that. It's not an easy question to answer. I don't know. I suppose it's something that I see. Maybe what's a stimulus? Maybe it's an idea that I could achieve something. Again, the problem solving, trying to solve some problem, or sometimes. I mean, I'm not very satisfied when when something emerges from a doodling. If you understand doodling, if you're just playing with the paper, and something looks like a bird, I don't find that very satisfying. And I think that stems back from my, maybe the Max Hume concept. So he always worked. He always had a chosen subject, or a suggested subject, which he wanted to achieve in origami. And I prefer that to the things being obtained by accident. I don't really like that. So sometimes I just have some abstract folding concept. And I recently bought a very nice book by Junmai Kawa, which is full of great ideas, and there's sort of, sometimes there are stimuluses, there are little processes, little folding sequences within the model as a whole. And when I think that this is fascinating, maybe it will lead me to something new. But equally, if I see something in nature, or if some object even, I think it's I'm as I said before, I'm following my nose. I'm seeing what's around the next corner, and I don't actively seek it. I don't think now, what am I going to create? I mean, these things just sort of, the idea materializes somehow, and I don't exactly know how. It's just chance, really.
But
there's not an easy answer to that question.
But it led me to another question. So
okay.
you said that you like your model solves a problem, but how you find the how you solve the problem?
Well, I think it's trial and error, isn't it? You try. Sometimes you succeed first time, which is fairly rare. Other times you try again to achieve. So just as an example, so I'm as Trang said before the meeting started, I'm working on a new edition of my book Brilliant Origami, expanded version. And so there are lots of models that I designed after I published Brilliant Origami, or some that I didn't include because I didn't think they were any good. But there's one, in the late 80s, I went to an origami event in Italy. And it was a very unusual event because it was a combined convention and exhibition. And it was in an unusual place too, because the building, the exhibition was going to be held in an exhibition hall, which had previously been an abattoir. You understand abattoir? It's a place where the animals are slaughtered, are killed to be subsequently eaten. But the building was no longer used as an abattoir. It was used as a place for cultural events, and so it was arranged that we would have an origami exhibition on a grand scale. And so many people were invited to go to this for a week or something to prepare exhibits on a grand scale, large scale exhibits. And on the outside of the building, there was a large head of a bull's head, to give a clue to the original purpose of this building. And so somebody said, somebody should make an origami bull to go on the inside. So on the outside of the building was the stone sculpture of the bull's head. On the inside, it was suggested that there would be a bull's head made in origami. Now, if you just give me a minute, I'll show you I've got the catalogue of this exhibition, because I actually managed to fold a bull's head, which was shown approximately the same size as the bull's head on the outside. So I designed this thing, so I think it's actually not too bad a model. So I'm trying to recreate this. I don't exactly remember how to do it. But just give me a second.
Thì mình vừa hỏi ông ấy lại một là nghĩa là mình biết được ai truyền cảm hứng cho ông ấy, nhưng mà không biết được là cái gì đã truyền cảm hứng cho ông ấy, nghĩa là ông ấy tại sao ông ấy lại sáng tác mẫu mới. Thì ông ấy trả lời là ông ấy không hẳn là ông ấy đi theo cái hướng mà gấp bừa ra mẫu, mà ông ấy muốn cái mẫu của mình nó là giải quyết một cái vấn đề gì đấy, chứ nó không phải là cứ ngồi gấp linh tinh để thấy nó giống cái gì ra cái đấy. Thế đấy, thì ông ấy đang kể chuyện tiếp. Okay.
So this is the origami model that I designed. So the exhibition was in 1987. So I still have some copies of this exhibition catalogue. So in order to make this bull, I made a drawing on a back of an envelope, that's what I thought that the bull looked like on the outside of the building, and that was the origami result that I achieved. Now I'm trying to remember how I did it. And I can't actually remember exactly, but I've got sort of something like that. So this is still being sort of refined. I mean, it's something like that. But I need to try and make it. I'm trying to recreate it so that I can make drawings for it. And if they're good enough, well, maybe they'll get into the book. But this is a work in progress. So, but it's funny. It's funny going back, at least 30 years, 40 years, and trying to put myself back in my head, put myself back in the same frame of mind as when I made this model so many years ago.
Yeah, thank you for the story. Is this exhibition is all about bull? And
no, it was all. It was a very interesting event, because it was actually the first time I met somebody who's become a very, very good friend, and that is Tomoko Fusei. Japanese, she's known as the queen of unit origami, as you've heard of her, of course. And she's now become a really very close friend, and we communicate quite often. And she was invited by the organizers of this convention. She'd just recently published her first couple of origami books, and they'd been received very, very well in Italy. The first couple of books, one was, I think, rather more basic, but the second one was a book of origami boxes, which has become, synonymous with. So she came, and I was excited to go for the purposes of obviously the event, but also really to meet her, because I'd heard of her, and I very much admired her work, and it was a nice occasion to meet her. But the object of the thing was to make things in a grand scale. So in fact, there's a few pictures of so I made a big horse and a big elephant, but they weren't really all that big. I mean, they were only sort of this big, something like that, because to make a big horse or a big elephant, you need a huge piece of paper. And then there are other problems, because the paper doesn't hold its own weight. There's a sort of, reaches a point, I'm sure you've experienced it if you've folded paper, when the paper gets to a certain size, it's unable to support its own weight. So in order to make these things stand up, you have to build some kind of wooden construction or armature to go inside. But it was anything that was big. That was the idea. So Tomoko actually made some very big unit pieces, which worked surprisingly well, I remember. And Paul Jackson was there too, and he made a lot of things. Paul Jackson, also very interesting personality. He was also a very good friend. But in those days, he was rather, what should we say, radical. And so he didn't make he didn't want to follow the things which were popular or fashionable. So this is what, you know, he perfected this concept of the one crease paper fold, models made from just one crease. He was rather tired of very complicated folding where there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of creases. He wanted to know what it's possible to make one crease. And also he was the inspiration for the school of folding, which is crumpling, which has been pioneered by Vincent Floderer in France. The crumpling of paper, which can then be opened up to make very beautiful forms. And I remember at this particular exhibition, he said, "I'm going to make a series of folds, which are paper, a series of maybe there were 10 sheets of paper, I don't quite remember, and each one was, well, the first one was a flat sheet of paper, the next one was slightly crumpled, the next one much more so, etc., etc. And then these were then opened up, and he made a series that were on in a line. So it wasn't a conventional model by any standards, really, not by any accepted standards of the time. But this thing was put out on display, and he said, "Look, we have to be careful because somebody might think it's rubbish, then they might throw it away." I don't think that happened, but it was a concern. So there you are.
But I think it's very easy to make a very big crumb origami ball.
Sure. Yeah. Well, you know, Paul was always a radical. I think he still is. He doesn't want to follow what the popular trends, shall we say. He wants to think of new ways, new avenues. He's very, very broad thinking and a very fascinating man. If you ever meet him, I think you'll come away a changed person. I certainly was.
Yeah, I wish I was there. Okay, I will translate a little bit for the audience. Yeah. Thì mình sẽ dịch lại một chút cái câu chuyện lúc nãy ông ấy chia sẻ. Nếu mà ai mà dành tiếng Anh ấy có thể là có thể là sẽ biết xem là mình nói sai ở đâu thì sửa nhá. Thì đấy, thì ông ấy chia sẻ là cái mẫu của ông ấy thì ông ấy không hẳn là sáng tác theo kiểu gấp bừa, xong rồi thấy cái giống cái gì thì làm ra cái đấy, mà ông ấy thường là có một cái ý định gì trước, nhưng mà cái ý định đấy nó đến từ đâu thì ông không có câu trả lời đâu, ông cũng tùy thôi, đấy, đến đâu thì đến. Nhưng mà ông ấy thường là có một cái ý tưởng gì đó trước, sau đấy ông ấy tìm cách giải quyết vấn đề đấy, xong rồi để ra được cái mẫu. Sau đấy ông ấy kể tiếp đến một cái triển lãm ở bên Ý, như là nó ở trong một cái tòa nhà mà trước đây nó là hình như là nó là một cái lò mổ, nghĩa là đấy, thì nhưng mà bây giờ thì không dùng nữa và biến thành một cái triển lãm về gấp giấy. Đấy, ở ngoài nó là một cái hình đầu con bò, nghĩa là mô hình hình tượng đầu con bò mà đấy, để tượng trưng cho cái chức năng của cái tòa nhà đấy, trước nó là lò mổ, nhưng mà ở trong thì nó là một cái triển lãm về origami. Thì ông David này, ông ấy thiết kế ra cái mẫu origami hình đầu con bò đấy cho cái triển lãm đấy. Thì ông ấy bảo là cái triển lãm đấy thì gồm các mẫu gấp cỡ lớn, thực ra cũng không lớn lắm nhưng mà nó khá lớn so với cái kích thước thời đấy, kiểu tương đối to ấy. Thế thì ông ấy ngoài cái đấy thì ông ấy còn gấp cả con voi rồi đấy, mấy con khác nữa. Xong rồi có cả Tomoko Fuse này, rồi là Paul Jackson. Thì ông ấy kể là Paul Jackson trong cái triển lãm đấy là ông ấy đưa ra cái ý tưởng là về sự vò giấy ấy. Đấy, ông ấy bày một tờ giấy này, xong rồi hơi vò một chút, xong rồi tờ tiếp theo lại vò nhiều hơn đấy, thế nó thành một chuỗi tác phẩm. Thì đấy là đấy, thì đấy là một số cái chia sẻ của ông ấy về sáng tác. Và không biết mình có kể thiếu hay kể sai ở đâu không. Thì bây giờ có thể tiếp đến câu hỏi của bạn Phát đi. Sau Phát thì sẽ đến anh Trương nhé, bởi vì anh Trương có đến 7 câu. Thì bây giờ cho Phát hỏi trước. Xong rồi Phát có nói được tiếng Anh không hay là anh dịch? Thôi anh giúp nhá, anh giúp hỏi luôn nhá. So another person asked you about when you designing something and you stuck. So how can you overcome it?
I think the answer is to leave it. I think it's not really helpful. You reach a point where you are stuck, and I think you have to stop. And maybe the problem arrives after a period when your brain has had a chance to process the problem a bit more, or maybe see it in a different way. Very often you can achieve the solution by looking at it in a completely different way. So my reaction is, if I get to a point when I can't solve the problem, the only thing to do, in my view, is to just say, okay, I'll leave it. I'll come back to it. The problem will still be there, and while I'm thinking about the problem, and maybe the solution will emerge. I often find also that very often, if you're really working hard on solving a problem, sometimes the solution comes very easily, sometimes early in the morning, for me anyway, or when you're thinking about something completely different. So your brain has this unsolved problem stored away, and it's, even though you're not consciously thinking about how to solve the problem, unconsciously you still are. I still find that I am considering, and sometimes there's a flash of inspiration, and the problem is miraculously solved, or you have at least a new idea. Like, how would it be if I tried this, or if I started from a different? Maybe for example, maybe I'm thinking of folding the paper in half this way to begin with, but if I fold the paper in half this way, maybe there's it's a fairly facile suggestion, but even changing a simple thing, if you've been always starting folding it like that, how would it be if you fold the paper like that? Even that can resolve a sticky problem, shall we say. So I think the only thing to do is leave it, because even if you're not consciously trying to solve the problem, unconsciously you still are, without knowing.
Yeah, that's a great advice. I also do the same. Yeah. Thì ông ấy bảo là đấy, nếu mà khi nào mà bí mẫu ấy, thì cứ kệ nghỉ tí, sau này một thời gian sau mình quay lại thì có khi mình lại nghĩ ra ý tưởng gì mới, thế thôi. Với cả là ông ấy bảo là mặc dù là mình bỏ nó đấy, nhưng nghĩa là trong vô thức thì chắc nó cái não bộ của mình sẽ vẫn luôn xử lý cái vấn đề đấy một cách vô thức, nên là một thời gian sau có khi là mình lại tự nhiên nó nghĩ ra, thế thôi. Nên là đấy là cách làm của ông ấy.
Thực ra cách này áp dụng được với nhiều vấn đề khác chứ không chỉ origami.
And if you open the chat box, you can see someone fold your models.
Ah, right. Let me see. Excellent. I'm having a look.
Bây giờ anh Trương có thể anh Trương có thể là mở mic xong rồi hỏi trực tiếp luôn ấy.
Hi, Dave.
Hi.
Hi, I'm June.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to see you tonight.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, I have some questions I have prepared for you. Yeah, I saw that you are painting, oil painting. Yeah. Did you study in a college, or it's just a hobby?
It was a diversion, really, because the truth is I worked for in a bank in England here for 32 years, but my job was not very exciting. I didn't really enjoy, and so I started painting in the late 70s. And I found it a great diversion and a great release, if you like, from my boring daytime job. So I used to go to evening classes to study initially general painting and drawing, and then I started to paint. I used to go to a portrait painting class. I had a number of teachers. And I'm still good friends with the last one, although I stopped going to his class. His class stopped many years ago. But I'm, you know, with the knowledge that I acquired, I suppose I attended these classes for probably maybe 15, 20 years, and then they stopped for one reason or another. And now I was very fortunate. I had this boring job, but I was very fortunate to be able to retire, to leave my job, and to become to be a retired person when I was very young, relatively speaking. I was only 49 years old when I quit my job. So I was extremely lucky, and I live in a very beautiful place. And one of my regular activities, probably more, I'm more active creatively in painting than I am with origami, because there's always something new. I can go and walk. So these paintings that you see behind you are places that I can walk to in 10 or 15 minutes. And so it's become a little bit more than a hobby. Originally, I think it was more than a hobby. It was a diversion from my tedious work job, and then it's become if you like, an intellectual activity. It's a very pleasant experience, being outside with in the open air, trying to paint a picture of a tree or something. So there's never any shortage of inspiration from what I see in the fields and the area where I live. So yes, and it's interesting. I think that I've often said that I think that the two parallel activities of origami and painting, and they're not really closely related at all, but they, the mental processes are rather different. But I think I've often thought that, I'm glad I do both, because I think in some way one influences the other. So I'm considering different kinds of problems when I'm painting a tree to when I'm folding a horse's head. But I think again, a part of it is aesthetics. Is the thing that I'm working on. Is it going to be good looking? Does it look well? I don't want to create anything that's ugly, really. So I want it to be aesthetically pleasing. It's also, and the other thing that's in common, it's a challenge of the material that I'm working in. In the case of, in the horse's head, we've got this material which is paper, and in the case of painting, it's the paint and the process of actually applying the paint to the canvas. And so these are sort of, if you like, technical problems that face, but they're very different.
Yeah.
And I think it's also analytical to a certain extent. That also the process of painting is, you have to decide first of all, what you're going to paint, the composition, if you like. This is the fundamental. You cannot start without knowing what it is you're going to put in on your support, your canvas, your board. And in the same way, when you're folding, sometimes with folding it's rather different, because you don't necessarily know what you're going to end up with. You have probably a basic idea about a horse's head, for example. You want it to look like a horse's head. You want it to look reasonably attractive. So there are common problems, but the process are very, very different in many ways. But I'm glad that I have both of these activities going side by side, and somehow they they benefit one another.
I see. I really love seeing your paintings.
Thank you very much. I do sometimes. Sometimes it goes okay. I'm happy with it.
Yeah. About the structure in origami, do you have any of recipe or formula? Yeah.
No, not really. I don't think you can have too many formulas. So I think that in the early days of when I was studying Harbin, the first paperbacks, I was it was the principle was you have to understand the fundamentals. Of course you do. What's a mountain fold? What's a valley fold? Then you had to learn the bases. So you learned a fish base and a bird base and a frog base. And then I remember reading a long article about the concept of the blints. This is where you take the four corners to the center of the square, and that immediately doubles your possibility because you have a square. Instead of having four corners, it's got 8. And people in the 70s made complex forms using the blint concept to find extra potential, to find other facets. If you wanted a horse with 4 legs and 2 ears and a nose and a tail, you made a bird base, but not with a standard square, with a blint square, because you had twice the number of points, and that was for me a big, at the time, a big eye opener. But then I think again, influences of BOS. I think I was encouraged to sort of forget about the concept of bases and particular techniques. I think I've also been interested in sort of non-traditional geometries. For example, I mean, the horse is from an equilateral triangle, and a part of the reason for doing this was I was designing another model, which it was I think it was actually a kangaroo, and it was very. I achieved a result, but it wasn't very elegant. It was far too thick, and I had too many layers of paper. And I thought, well, maybe if I change the starting shape, move away from a square to a triangle, and this was the stimulus for this was Yoshizawa, because in one of his books he had a section showing if you folded the standard bases on different shapes of paper. So, for example, an equilateral triangle, you can make a bird base with an equilateral triangle, etc. And you can make or you could use instead of a rhombus shape, and you make a bird base with that. So, he was a stimulus for saying, well, it was okay. Yoshizawa did it. Well, it was okay. I thought, there's no reason why I shouldn't either. So I realized that I could achieve a more economical and a more satisfactory result for my kangaroo if I started with a triangle, and that led to other animals. So I like sort of I don't like to concentrate on standard techniques. It's always more pleasing for me if I can find a result without resorting to traditional ideas. And I also like working with the standard A4 sheet of paper, because this has got great promise for an origami designer. People say, they don't really think of this as a useful starting shape, but it really is. And so, because it's I'm sure you know this. If you fold the diagonal of an A4 like this, so this side is the same as that. So immediately you've got a great promising thing. And there's a lot of my designs rely on the relationship of the A4, the portion to pentagonal geometry, which actually is not strictly accurate. So it's imprecise, but in terms of folding, it works. I mean, we but by folding a number of layers, you're bound to build in some imprecise, the inaccuracies, because the layers become thicker. So you can take advantage of this inaccuracy, if you like, to use to find other possibilities. So I'm interested in that kind of thing. But I don't really like to rely on traditional forms or bases, even though that was really the way. That was the way to become a creative folder. The other person who advocated in a book that I read by Kasahara, in an early book of his, he had a good chapter on how to design things and a way to interpret it. You made a sketch of your subject and saw how you could to understand the form or the shapes of your chosen subject. So principally, those are the things. I don't really want to be involved in traditional things. I don't want to rely on a basis if I can help it. And if it's an interesting new geometric possibility, that can be a stimulus for some new design.
I see. Interesting.
Does that answer the question?
Yes, of course. Yeah, very interesting for me. My first question, I think you mentioned before. So I went to the. I'm going to the first question. Yeah. I think many people here don't know much about BOS. Can you introduce us a little bit about the members and the activities?
Yes, sure. So the BOS is it was a big help for me in my origami career, if you like, if you want to call it a career, because it introduced me to other people, and so the interesting for me, the origami is a strange contradiction, because it's first and foremost, for most people, it's something you do alone with the paper at home. And when I first went to BOS, I went to conventions. I realized that there was a big social side as well, and I made a lot of really close friends, lifelong friends, through meeting them. And so about the BOS, it was founded in 1967. And I think we're coming up to. We had a big celebration of 50 years of BOS, which was in 2017. So we're coming up to. I don't know whether they don't think they celebrated 55, but anyway, never mind. So there are not a huge number of members, but certainly at one stage, and probably today, there are, even though it's called the British Origami Society. There are members, in many countries of the world, and in the early days, it was the big attraction was the magazine. We produced a magazine which it comes out every 2 months, and I think for all those for many of those years, it's been regularly every 2 months a magazine has been produced. Now, it's all volunteer-based. There's nobody is paid. So this is all done in people's spare time and because of their love and, if you like, passion for origami. And we have the benefits of the BOS membership. The first and foremost is you receive a 6 times a year magazine. You have the opportunity of conventions. Okay, they're UK based, but very often we have visitors from abroad. So we also members organize local meetings, which are supported by BOS in many cases. There's a supplies activity. So we have if you like, a shop, which comes to conventions and people can order by mail order. And in the early days, in the 60s and 70s, in the early days of BOS, there was the big problem was material, finding stuff, new things to fold, new instructions. And so in those days, they established a library So if somebody designed a new model, they made drawings for it, diagrams. You could send it to the magazine, to the librarian, and it was possible then to borrow, and it was by post. It was well before the days of the internet. People could borrow printed diagram sheets and keep them at home for a couple of weeks or something, and then they sent them back. When I first joined the BOS, this was a way that I expanded my knowledge about other designs. I think there was a restriction on the number of things that you could borrow. So nowadays, that requirement has been superseded, because now it's very easy to find plenty of good new material. There are plenty of books that you can buy, and you can get hold of them very easily through specialist origami publishers like Nicholas Terry in France, and other organizations like Origami USA, etc. There are many, and of course you can go to Japan, Origami Gallery House, and the Nippon Origami Association, the Origami Tanteidan, and so the need for new material has been, it's easy to satisfy a keen desire for new material. It's not difficult, and of course we have the internet, which has a cross section and different designs, all different kinds. Now the problem here is being able to decide what's good and bad. So as you know, a lot of people nowadays, they learn origami through YouTube videos, which for me it's not very helpful. I don't enjoy really watching a video tutorial, but that's how many people come to origami these days, isn't it? So BOS, what else? Yeah, I mean, that's it really. I suppose we have maybe 500 or 600 members internationally, with probably half of those in the UK. So it's not a big organization. But what's also interesting is that the BOS has been very fortunate in some of our members, when they've died, they've left money to the British Origami Society. And so the BOS is quite prosperous. It has money, quite a lot of money in the bank. And it sounds good, but it's not necessarily good, because being a volunteer organization, it's a lot of responsibility for people who are in control of the BOS. They have to make decisions about what to do with the money that we have, and it's fairly well controlled. So that's something about BOS. But if you can find the website, British Origami Society, and you can explore the website, which has quite a few resources online. But I think what is good, it's lasted so well and for so long because of people's passion, people's great enthusiasm for origami. People, like everybody here, we love origami very much. It's something very important in our lives. Certainly, it's been very important in a large portion of my life. It's since quite a young boy, I've started, and I'm still doing it, and I'm still fascinated by it, and still, if you like, passionate about it. And I think most people are here, I'm sure, can recognize that and probably share the same kind of feelings.
Yeah.
So,
thank you for your answer.
A pleasure.
My next question, we talk about your inspiration, order and origami model. So I would like to ask you, do you have any attention for the new generation in origami? Yeah. Any please.
Sorry.
Any new origamis that you are.
Yeah. I'm a little bit out of date, maybe, but there are a number of people that, I'm still fascinated in seeing new work emerge. So there's a guy in South America, in Bolivia, called Fernando Chura. He's really good. He's really very good. There's in Germany a young man called Bodo Haag. Maybe you've seen his work. He's a young man, but very, very. He's an engineer. I think there's, I tend to divide origami styles into engineering and artistic. So Bodo is very much an engineer. So he makes very complex things, again, all from the obligatory uncut square. Achieve some remarkable things. There's a number of names that I can. How else am I think of? It's hard to know, but I mean, again, the Japanese, the people connected to origami Tanteidan, Satoshi Kamiya, it's a major talent. But there's a new generation of people. So in the days in the 90s, 80s, and 90s, the people like Takashi Hojo, who made beautiful figures, and Hideo Komatsu, very beautiful figures. But these are they're no longer young men, although they were when they emerged they were quite young men, and I think maybe their creative output has sort of dropped a little bit. I'm trying to think of another interesting guy I like very much. He's not very young, but he's good. It's Sipo Mabona, who lives in Switzerland. Originally, he was from South Africa. But it's an amazing world, I think. I mean, I'm very fortunate to have met and become friends with a lot of these people. So I was a very close friend of Eric Joisel, who died maybe 10 years ago. And who else? Tomoko is a very close friend. And I know some people in Japan, of course. Makoto Yamaguchi is quite an old friend. And Kasahara I've met a number of occasions. So I don't know. I need to spend more time thinking about who are the leading new generation of folders. But I think you probably know just as well as me. I mentioned a few names that come out of my head.
I see. And they're also my favorite.
Well, yeah. You can tell when they're good. There's a young guy in fact, I've noticed that they've just announced that the Origami Tanteidan, they're having their convention in August, and they've just announced the two guests, some from Korea, and then another guy from France. I can't remember his name. That's just escaped me. But a young guy. If you look at the Origami Tanteidan website, you can see. You follow the links. You can see the two guests. And the other young guest. And his name completely escapes me. I can't remember. But he's got quite a talent. He's a young man, but his models have a real personality. I think in one of the things we look for, or I look for.
Sebastian Limay?
I'm sorry?
Is it Sebastian Limay?
No, it's not him. I'm trying to remember his name. I should know, but his name's gone. Anyway, but I think one of the things I look for is a sort of individuality, a style. I mean, I think it's very easy to become if you like, a clone. You can, sometimes people's work is indistinguishable from the others. But if somebody who has enabled, you can recognize a particular style just by looking at the model, and you can say, yes, that's by him or her, whoever it is. So that's what I look for. When I first began to design, I think I was out to impress other people, but I think now I'm more interested in pleasing myself than other people. I don't really care whether anybody else likes it or not, what I'm doing. I think, I think that applies for a lot of creative activities. I think it's a bit dangerous if you're out to impress others. And I think you have to sort of rise to your own standard and to establish a level that you're happy with, and just be happy that you've achieved it. And if somebody else happens to like it, well, that's a very nice bonus. But I suppose it's a selfish thing. I do it because I'm folding because I want to please. I want to achieve something, or solve a problem, if you like. And you know, if I've solved that problem, that's good enough for me. And if somebody else happens to like it too, well, that's a real bonus. But it's not. I'm not really folding for other people necessarily.
I see. So, and I think my last question. Once I heard from Uncle Giang that you met Akira Yoshizawa when you came to Japan.
Yeah.
Can you tell us?
Yeah, there were lots of stories. How long have we got? But I'd read a lot about Yoshizawa in my early explorations through the books that I picked up, and I had a desire. I mean, this is in the late 70s, early 80s. I thought, would it ever be possible for me to meet this man whose work I really, really admired? And so in those days, people used to, it was well before the days of internet and email, people communicated by old-fashioned handwritten letters. With an envelope that you put a stamp on, and put through the letter. But that was also in many ways much more rewarding than receiving an email, because when I was finding out about the origami world, I wrote to a lot of people whose work I admired, and in many cases I sent something that I'd made in my envelope, and I posted it to them, and they responded in the same way. They sent me a letter including something that they'd folded, and this was a really lovely exchange. Much better than getting a photograph of a model in an email, because you actually had in your hand something that they'd actually folded, and that was really a big excitement. So I did this, and I wrote a number of times to Yoshizawa. I remember I even wrote to him. I found there was an address for Yoshizawa's group, which he called the International Origami Center in Tokyo, and that address in the back of one of the books, The Carbon, which was the book that we were talking about before. And so I thought, I need to write to this guy. So I did, and I got a polite letter back, and I didn't get, actually I got a folded butterfly. I don't know whether he folded it himself. It may have been one of his assistants or his wife or something. But I was inquiring about a book. I wanted to buy a book, and he actually sent me on trust. I hadn't paid for it in advance. He sent me the book without my paying beforehand. He said, "Send me the money when it's all." So that was, very nice. But when I first got this book, I was a bit disappointed. It was, I don't know if you know the book of Yoshizawa called Origami Dokuhon 1, which is a green book with a peacock on the front. So I got this, and when I opened it up, I was a little bit disappointed. But it wasn't. It was when I started going a little bit deeper into the book that I realized it was, really lots of wonderful ideas it held in there. So it wasn't as glamorous, maybe, as some of the other books. Excuse me. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I decided to go to Japan, and I by that time I'd established a number of contacts by correspondence, and they included Mrs. Toshi Takahama, who's a grand old lady, and she was, at the time, she was a connection, a bridge between Japan and the West. So she spoke English, and her husband was some kind of businessman who had to travel, so she traveled as well. She spoke English, and she connected a lot of people who who in the origami world, and he was the bridge between the West, people in Europe and the Americas, and the Japanese involvement. So she was a contact. The other people I contacted were Yoshihide Momotani and his wife, who had previously been to England, although I'd not been able to meet them, and of course Yoshizawa. So I decided to go and meet all of these people, and I went for 3 weeks in 1980. And the problem was that I found out that Yoshizawa didn't really have a connection with anybody else in Japan. He saw himself as the master, and he rather disapproved of other origami artists and practitioners elsewhere. And so, although I was meeting Yoshizawa, I was advised to keep it, not to tell him. The next day I was meeting Mrs. Takahama, and the day after that I was meeting Mr. and Mrs. Momotani, because he would be angry. So it was really a delicate sort of balancing act. I had to be every time I said something, I thought, I better be sure that before I open my mouth, that I'm saying the right thing, or not telling anything more, not saying anything more than I should. So it was rather difficult. So I had some sleepless nights because they asked questions. What are you doing with your time in Japan? I said, oh, I'm doing some sightseeing. So it was all a bit difficult. Somehow I managed to avoid it, but I think he must have known that I met other people. But I had the good fortune to meet Yoshizawa on a number of occasions, not only in Japan. I think I met him in Japan maybe 3 or 4 times, but also in Europe. He came to Europe and to America. I met him a number of times in America because he traveled a lot. So, and the memorable times. So the first time I went, he was a man in his 70s, I guess, maybe about my age now, and they did a lot for me. I was invited to his house. I spent an extraordinary day at his house. Most of the day, I was collected early in the morning, and he had in his house many boxes of models, all categorized. So he had a box maybe like this, and he had a label monkeys on the outside, and you opened up, there were many types of monkeys, all his experiments, or penguins, or horses, or whatever it was, flowers. And then one of the things he showed me was how to prepare paper in this particular way, which is a kind of, people call it in the West, back coating, where you have 2 different kinds of paper which are effectively glued together, and the 2 different kinds of paper can be different weights. So he used this for making very solid structures. So I was given instruction how to do this, and I was given. So I was also met. He had a group of folders at the time. They were all his followers, his if you like, his students. So it was a memorable time, but it wasn't. I have to say, it wasn't easy because of this, these political problems. So we tend to think in the friendly origami world that everybody who does origami is a big friend, a big comrade. But it isn't. In Japan, I think the thing was that Yoshizawa was from the sort of old school, in those days, there was a sort of master student position, master pupil. And you read about this in other fields as well, where the people study with the master for many years. And I don't know whether this is true, but I've understood it to mean that the achievements of the pupil were traditionally always credited to the master, because he was the teacher. So you did, if you were studied under a particular school in an artistic field, if you were a potter or a calligrapher or a ikebana person, you studied with a master, but it was the master that took the credit for your achievements. I don't know whether it was ever quite like that, but that's what I understood. But I think it was certainly the case with Yoshizawa to a certain extent, because his students, they weren't really given a sort of free rein to pursue their own artistic development. You know, they were very much under the shadow of the master. So, but I think that's largely gone now. I think that it's much more a Western tradition. That you know, you stand on your own 2 feet. You might study with somebody, but if you achieve something, if you achieve something on your own, then you know, you're the person that gets the credit and the benefit. So they were, you know, I admired him very much. He was not an easy man, but I know that many Japanese artists had to treat Yoshizawa with a great deal of respect, or not. They didn't have any connection with him at all. But that was the difficulty that I had in those days.
Yeah,
So
very interesting story, and I really love to hear about your habit to change the mail. The traditional mail with the envelope and stamp. It's very adorable for
we should start something. We should all share our things we fold.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think that happens now, doesn't it? I mean, I think one of the big benefits of the pandemic that we've just emerged from is that this kind of meeting that we're having now is becoming, you know, very popular. It's certainly during lockdown itself, there were a lot of activities held online which were very successful, and people have acquired the skill of teaching using, you know, these cameras, which are, you know, we Asya and I bought this camera because we realized at the beginning of lockdown that it was going to be really an essential piece of equipment, and in fact we use it a lot. And we don't have to go to meet people, although that's really one of the great excitements about origami, is meeting people face to face that you can fold with. But in a way that it's kind of replaced by the online meetings such as this one. So that's one of the big benefits of that we've had from the pandemic.
And especially as a Australian, we're a little bit alone over here. So it's.
So where are you?
I'm in Sydney right now.
Do you have origami friends nearby?
We do have some. Last year I went to my first origami convention in Sydney. We have the Sydney Origami Group, and we joined with the Melbourne Origami Group together. And so next year we're going to Melbourne, and last year but only every second year, but quite a small group still. But yeah, we really admire you, and so it's amazing to sort of meet you. But of course, I'm very interested that so much amazing origami is coming now from Vietnam as well.
True. Yeah, you're doing a great job, you guys.
Yeah,
it's lots of beautiful, and for a number of years. It's not a new thing, is it? Really? I mean, you've been. I mean, you carry the Eastern tradition rather than the Western. I think there's a good few more artists than there are technicians in VOG. Am I right, Trang?
No, I'm glad that you say so. You think so?
I do think so. Anyway, so anything else?
Cường, do you have any question more?
There are no other question. Mọi người có muốn hỏi gì nữa không nhỉ?
I send you a few questions. I don't know. You have time to. I don't know. Do we still have time now? No. I know it's past 2 hours. So if you're tired, you can.
Yes. Chú Giang, nếu mà có gì chú cứ hỏi luôn câu của chú luôn ấy.
You still have time there, or you tired, or?
Shall we say another shall we go to another 10 minutes?
Okay, this is fine. I think I sent you a list of few questions. I think you addressed a few of them already.
Okay. So I can happily do it, or we can have another meeting if you like later on.
Okay, but anyway, so maybe you can quickly answer maybe these two questions, that because you have seen many different type or style of origami because you went. You know. So what do you think that we need more in origami?
Oof. New ideas, I suppose, is the originality, I suppose, is what I'm seeking. I mean, it's a strange thing. I mean, I don't want to be unkind, but I'm not a great fan of the tessellation sport. I think it seems to be incredibly repetitive, and in the same way as maybe the box-pleating style is. It seems to be, to open the doors for all possibilities, but it's not exciting, is it? Not to me anyway. So I think it's hard to know, to be specific, but I'd say, originality, new ideas. I suppose some kind of aesthetic quality. Some. I think probably we need more artists and less mathematicians. And that's not really fair, because there are many exciting mathematical ideas, aren't there? But I think I would appreciate seeing more artists, if you like, people who have a real artistic sensibility rather than a mathematical one. That's because, I suppose that's my angle. I was hopeless at mathematics at school, although I think I learnt more mathematics through origami than I ever did at school. But I think that's what I'd say. It's probably not specific enough, but that's what
I think that's great. And I also, that leads to another question, a very difficult topic to discuss, the art or craft. So in your opinion, what is needed for a piece to be considered art?
Yeah, well, I think I often think about that, and I think for me, it's craft if it can be repeated. So if you can make a replica of somebody else's work, I don't think that's art. So if I think if it becomes art, maybe if there's a bit of you in it, a bit more expression. But I would say that I would say percentage of origami that I see that exists is maybe 75% craft or 80% craft, 20% art. I'd say far more craft than art, because most of it is reproducible. Most people come to origami because they want to make Satoshi Kamiya's Ancient Dragon, or even Tomoko Fusei's boxes, or whatever it is, and they want to make as closely as they possibly can to the thing that's in the book. But I mean, that's not art, is it really? I mean, the art is when something, something emerges which is, is exciting and new, or at least some sort of emotional content, or some sort of, something that it's a very difficult topic, and I'm not sure I have a complete answer, but I'm pretty sure that the majority of origami that we see is craft, and the percentage which is truly art is pretty small. And it depends on your definition. I mean, what do they say? It's art if it's in a gallery. Well, not a very good definition in my view, but maybe that's the way it is. I think for me, art is something which has a personal style, or some kind of message hidden, maybe, or maybe even not intended. But I think if it's just something that can be slavishly repeated, that's certainly not art, is it? Not in my book, anyway. I mean, there's a certain art in actually creating the thing. So maybe the artistry, but I worry about people also who have a strong desire to make origami an art, or a sort of recognized form of art. I mean, there are many people I talk to, we've got to establish origami as an art. Well, I'm very happy if it's craft in some respects, because it's, you know, if you're getting excitement from it, and I'm, you know, I get a lot of excitement from folding things which inspire me or attract me, or, you know, I mean, that's enough. I don't think it's important for it to be art specifically. I think people get a little bit too hung up on this mission, if you like.
Yeah, I do agree. I mean, you do whatever makes you happy. I think that's the most important thing.
It. If it pleases you, do it.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, and what is your favorite paper?
Oh,
what did you use for the horse, for example, and all the lions?
Yeah, that's my question too.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, going back to this exhibition, this Luna di Carte was called in Italy at the Abattoir. So I was introduced to paper called Fabriano, Italian paper called Fabriano, which is, there's many different international, but very beautiful. And on one occasion, I was given the remains of a large roll of this Fabriano paper, which I've used. It's not very easy to work. People like, what's it called, arch, French paper. It looks like arches, but it's actually pronounced arch paper, which is watercolor paper of different grades. I haven't actually spent a lot of time working with that. I tell you what I don't like. I don't whether I like, but what I do like, I'm not completely sure. I mean, I've been fiddling with this, trying to recreate this bull. I don't really know what this paper is. It's something that came from Nicholas Terry, but it's very nice to work with, very forgiving. I don't like elephantine very much at all. For me, I don't like it very much. I don't like the texture of it. It's got sort of a waxy feeling, which I don't find very attractive. I don't particularly like foil. In the 60s and 70s, people like Neil Elias and Fred Rome and Patricia Crawford, who were, you know, the superstars of their era, they folded from metal foil paper. Well, I tried to follow it, and I used it for a time, but it's horrible stuff. It's not really paper; it's metal. It hasn't got the same. I mean, paper's lovely stuff, isn't it? It's part of the reason we fold is because we like the material. Part of the reason I paint trees is because I like playing with oil paint. So that's you know, if you like the material, well, you're sort of already on the first rung of the ladder, if you like. But what do I like? If I'm experimenting, I'll use just ordinary. I actually dislike, in the West, people call this paper kami. Well, I don't like that word at all particularly, because kami in Japanese means paper. So an origami is folding paper. So if I'm experimenting, I'll use this. It does me fine. Or good old A4. You know, A4 is a fantastic resource. It's common garden printer paper. It's not for it's for practical reasons, because it's available, and it doesn't matter if it goes wrong. So I remember discussing with people. Paul Jackson, he used to say, you know, you don't want another good friend had a similar idea, called Jean-Claude Correa, a Frenchman who I was very close to. They used to say, look, you know, the danger is it's pretty paper. People buy expensive paper because it's very beautiful, and they fold something which is not very nice, and it still looks nice because of the paper. Now, if you fold something from the most mundane paper, like printer paper, and it's beautiful, that's really something. So, I also, at one period, I liked a lot just common brown wrapping paper, which we call craft, which has got lines in it, you know, ordinary sort of medium to even sometimes heavier weights of brown wrapping paper. And the beauty of it, it's available. It's easy to find. You haven't got to go spending thousands of pounds buying, you know, enormous rolls of Fabriano or Arch paper. So, you know, think I like things which are available because, again, going back to my early days, the big attraction to origami, I could always do it because it was always there. Paper was always there, and it was just ordinary paper, and I could still get a reasonable result. Referring back to somebody else mentioned that done some work using my Masu box idea, and I used to. I mean, you can make a very nice Masu box from a sheet of A4, and it's very pleasing if you can make something beautiful from something that's very mundane, something from the material which is just everyday, very familiar. So I know what I don't like, perhaps more than I know what I like.
But you know how thick the paper is, the Fabriano paper. How thick is it?
It was fairly heavy grade, the ones that I used. I mean, I've still got a horse which you'd see everywhere, which you used on the promotional thing. That was from Fabriano paper, and I've tried this. I made in about 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. This exact model, which I've just got here, and I've tried to make it again, and I can't really quite get close to that particular that result. I've not been able to recreate it. So in a way, I suppose that falls into sort of the art craft category because I can't do it.
Yes, that's
but certainly this Fabriano that I was introduced to at this Italian exhibition, there was lots of Fabriano paper which they'd got. I think part of the deal was that we would fold from Fabriano paper, but it was heavier rather than lighter grade. The exact weight I'm not sure, but it wasn't thin. It was not particularly.
But is that watercolor paper or some other type paper? Because I know that Fabriano also make not only watercolor paper.
They do, yeah. But I think this was white, and I bought some more rolls of it, which I've got upstairs, which occasionally, if I want to try and fold something good, I'll get out. But it's not easy to work with, really. I think probably I need to experiment with the Arche paper, which I know you like a lot, don't you, Jan?
Yeah, but it's the same. Fabriano, it watercolor paper, it was similar. So they come in many different ways. But if you buy the wrong, probably it cannot be like 300.
It's not it was not 300. No,
right.
It was.
Take the paper cannot come in big roll.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't sort of like a board. Right. But I think the important thing is, paper's all around us, and we can experiment with whatever we find. Again, it goes back to the idea. It's whatever's available. I like paper that I can just put my hand out and say, "This'll do." And it goes
back. But for study, it's fine. But one people concerned that if you send that to exhibition, then if you follow normal paper, it cannot,
Of course not.
And due the transportation, it will expand during the, so that's why. Because you need to think about those when you send your stuff to exhibition. So.
Of course. Okay, well, maybe I'm getting tired.
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, we should end at 11, but we are 30 minutes over.
No problem.
So thank you very much for
it's a great pleasure.
Yeah.
It's nice to meet you all. And
okay, thanks a lot, Dave. It's quite an honor to have you with us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dave.
I hope I see you at another meeting again, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you, Vanessa, for joining us.
Thank you. I've joined the Facebook group, so I hope I'll see you all soon again. Thank you, David. I'm a huge fan of yours. I'm really. It's 2:30 in the morning here, but I'll be.
Wow.
Yeah, I started up late.
Too late.
I really wanted to meet you, so.
You can lie in.
So much. On Sunday tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Okay, bye.
Thank you. Cảm ơn mọi người đã tham gia buổi nói chuyện hôm nay.